So our next speaker is Jake Holland, who I've had the pleasure of getting to know through attending IETF for the past few years. You can tell Jake is from Southern California because he wears flip-flops to Boston in a snowstorm without complaint. And he's going to talk about Bufferbloat.
Yeah. So it's actually not about Bufferbloat. It's about how applied queuing theory saved my marriage. And the benefits of understanding Bufferbloat. So I'm going to be talking about a difficult time in our lives. This was in 2012. My kids were 13, 10, and 7. It has a happy ending. This is my family last week at Thanksgiving. Me, my wife, my older daughter, younger daughter, my youngest son, Alex. He's actually taller than both of the girls, but is squatting for the picture. But yeah, my girls are off at college. They came to visit. But I'm going to go back to a time before that when, so our family has always put a high premium on academic excellence. This is attending school, getting our little awards that they get at the end of the school year. But that's like not easy, really. Something we hadn't appreciated when we first moved into the area. We picked the area we moved into because of the excellent schools. And they have this fundamental school system, which takes a sort of traditionalist approach to homework and discipline. And turns out 2 of our kids were diagnosed with ADD, by the way, which was, fun. One of them after already going all the way through this, which we sort of forced through by sheer force of will. But the eldest. So we were, our sort of homework load was on the high side. We believed we were well into the 2 hours. Not sure whether you should count sort of resistance from the children as part of that time, but in the time it actually takes, it was in fact taking quite some time. This actually wasn't a problem, however, because we were, it was stressful, but we were aligned on this issue, right? So my wife and I were aligned. The problem came from the things that got displaced. And the things that got displaced were things like chores. And this is not our house. This was an image from the internet, but it really could have been our house. Like every week, we ended up with something like this, and it was like a disaster, right? Not just the dishes, but the dishes were always the most urgent thing. Like and you may not know this if you've never sort of lived this, but when both of the sinks are full, you can't do dishes in the sink because it's like in the way. So you end up with this thrashing dynamic where it's like, it's the same thing, where it's like the virtual swapping is happening so fast you can't do anything else with the memory. So this was going on like every weekend. It would be a giant project to clean it up. And we had, and we're not the only ones that would go through this. This is a giant source of stress in our lives. This is a chart of arguments from the Institute for Family Studies about, chores is right on the top end, and this was a giant source of stress in our lives. We were really fighting about it, and we were both full-time parents. We were getting home at like 6, staying till like, spending the 2 hours on homework and trying to get the kids to bed at some reasonable time to get up in the morning. And, it was coming to a head at this time because, 7, 10, and 13, like we've been doing this for quite some time. Meanwhile, in my work life at this time, I was working at FastSoft. This is a photo from my photo album at the same time. This is a stack trace from the kernel. Sometimes that's all you get because like it'll crash and the core doesn't like actually finish dumping. So I would always take a picture when I got one of these. And meanwhile, I was also doing things like learning about Bufferbloat. And this is a comment I left on Jim Getty's blog, June 27, 2012, which is why I remember it was 2012 at 3:40 a.m. This is the kind of thing I was doing to sort of, I had no shortage of excuses for why I had to work late, do a lot of stuff. And one of the things I was learning about was Bufferbloat. Bufferbloat, as you probably know, many of you probably know, this phenomenon where you're sending in data to the network higher than your capacity, it's filling up the buffer, it doesn't back off until the buffer overflows, and you sort of, the effects that you get are like this increasing throughput out of TCP until you get sort of to the actual capacity, and then once you get to that capacity, then you start getting the delay build up because these buffers are happening, right? So the key insight that really helped our lives and made a giant difference is that, well, so the solution, first of all, to Bufferbloat is that you have this, you hash them into different buckets, and you round robin through the buckets, and you just send, and this way, even if something is taking up a lot of space in the buffer, it doesn't block anything else. The other things get to go through, right? So this is the fair queuing solution, and the insight is that the dishes was the same problem, right? We're using dishes, we're cleaning them at a slower rate, it's sort of gated by how much we eat, and I never even realized that this was actually, you know, a source of the problem was we had 2 full sets of dishes that we had before we moved in together. So our solution is, this is still in place today at our house. What we did is we just got different sets of plates, 1 set each. You're only allowed to eat off of your colored plate. And it's simple, it's enforceable, it's fair, and it doesn't matter. And you'd still get like 30 dishes from time to time, but the whole scope of the problem was so much smaller because all of them fit in one side of the sink. You now, and when you're trying to wash it, you just pull out the ones that's your color, and that's all you have to do, right? It's not your problem that other people still have dirty dishes. Nobody has to like be the one that's in charge of taking care of it all. And so, you know, we got to keep our standards of academic excellence. My son is still getting these things. My daughters, we kind of had to give up on them, but they made it through high school on time, and we're very proud of them. They're off to college and thriving. It's wonderful. And so, I mean, it all worked out in the end. And I mean, we live happily ever after. Yeah.
That was like M. Night Shyamalan. I was like completely unprepared for that segue. That's, I'm in awe of that.